Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. The Turkish Statistical Institute announced on Wednesday that consumer prices in Turkey slipped in December 2018.
December's figure was down 0.4% from 21.62% in November 2018. However, the consumer prices increased by 20.3% year-on-year. The highest annual increase in December was seen in furnishing and household equipment, up 31.36%, and in miscellaneous goods and services prices, up 28.8%. Consumer prices over the 12-month average in Turkey saw an increase of 16.33% by December last year, according to official data. Turkey's inflation had hit a 15-year high rate of 25.2% in October, before easing to 21.6% in November. Meanwhile, the Turkish government has extended the previously introduced tax cuts on several items, including house sales, furniture, and white goods, for another 3 months until the end of March this year, in an effort to stimulate economic activity. The value-added tax in housing sales and the furniture sector that were slashed from 18% to 8% will continue in the first 3 months of 2019. The special consumption taxes on domestic appliances were already suspended, and this measure will also remain in place until the end of March. Meanwhile, the private operators of the Osman Gazi Bridge and Gebze-İzmir Highway hiked the toll prices. A further tax increase was also introduced on alcoholic beverages.
Joining us tonight to talk about what's ahead for the Turkish economy in 2019 is Atilla Yeşilada, who is a prominent Turkish economist and a Turkey analyst at Global Source Partners. Good evening, Mr. Yeşilada. Welcome once again to This Week in Turkey.
Good evening, and it's my pleasure to get this broadcast.
So let's start with the fresh data that was announced earlier this week, as we've just heard in the previous news video. So according to the Turkish Statistical Institute, the published figures show that Turkey's inflation fell by 0.4% in December, but many reports suggest that prices may in fact not be falling. What do you think is going on here?
Well, there is certainly an argument or controversy about whether the measurements have been correct. I don't want to get into it. I really can't find any evidence of cheating or manufacturing the data by Turkstat. Instead, I want to focus on the positives and negatives of this inflation report. And in my view, the negatives dominate. The positive side, of course, is that headline inflation has decelerated by 5 percentage points over the last 3 months, with the core somewhat following the pattern, even though not as much as the headline, which is an achievement. Given the factors that we may wish to discuss, if you prefer, it's certainly likely to decelerate throughout 2019 with bumps along the road. But my forecast is that the government's end 2019 forecast, of CPI falling to 15 or 17% range is not unreasonable. That being said, this is really not sustainable. First, neither 20% nor 15% or even 10% ought to be considered even a qualified success in a world where the average emerging market is producing at worst 4% inflation. And we should seriously consider the structural problems and the economic policies that has brought us to this point. Two, part of the disinflation is caused by transitory factors such as the ongoing reductions in sales and special consumption taxes, which the government granted as a favor to the electorate run up to the municipal elections. Three, there has been massive pressure on merchants, wholesalers, retailers to suppress price increases or they'll be raided by the inspectors of the Commerce Ministry, which tends to be very painful and expensive in Turkey. So this is really a non-market intervention, and these people are losing profit margins. And as soon as the pressure lifts, we'll see a spring back effect in inflation. Finally, and most importantly, even though some of my colleagues claim that a tight monetary policy has led this inflation, I find no evidence to that effect. To me, the primary cause of this inflation is the disappearance of domestic demand. People simply don't have purchasing powers. They're not buying anything. So inflation falls, which leaves you with the conundrum. I mean, if the objective of this government is to revive domestic demand, purchasing power, not only prior to the March elections, but throughout 2009, because obviously we can't stay in recession forever, then inflation would immediately jump back to 20-25% range. We simply don't seem to have understood the root causes of the problem and the kind of really painful and long-term policies that need to be adopted to fight it.
Let's focus on the Turkish lira now, Mr. Yeşilada, and the ongoing pressures it's currently facing. It slid against the dollar by more than 3% on Thursday, as you know. So how do you explain the slide of the Turkish lira? Is it rooted in domestic dynamics, or can we talk about, or can we take into consideration what's happening in the global markets as a whole, or perhaps emerging markets?
Well, I think there are three reasons. First, as you said last, the risk of the aversion to risk in global markets explains part of recent slippage. Two, there are psychological factors. For some reason, anytime inflation falls, some smart guy out there writes a report that the central bank will immediately cut interest rates. I wouldn't put it past them, but I see no indication that on the Monetary Policy Council meeting, which is to be held on 18th of June. 18th of June. I tried to be sober for this broadcast, but it's not yet. On 18th of January, rates will be cut. March is a more feasible date. But, for 2 days, 2-3 days, these kind of reports or rumors create some kind of turbulence in TL, which seems to have subsided today. The third reason is more important, and in my view, it's permanent, and it's the beginning of the end, which is the non-market interventions or methods this government is using to beef up economic performance before the elections. It started with the raid of Anish warehouses, which is just silly, but fixing the treasury auctions in December was the first doubt that was placed in investors' minds. Yesterday, we found out that the extraordinary shareholders meeting of central bank was brought forward to 18th of January again, with the objective of collecting dividends early, which suggests to me that the Treasury is running out of money and they intend to use these dividends to reduce the amount of borrowing in February and March. This is scary because if you don't pay the market the kind of interest rate that reflects Turkey's CDS premiums or risk premium, they'll take their money and run, they'll convert their money. Third, I simply don't believe in fiscal austerity. I think the budget figures are completely doctored. They're not true. People are not being paid for the services they provide to the government. And given the few polls I have where AKP is running a very tight race in Istanbul and Ankara and losing in Izmir, I expect more shenanigans like that. Currently, investors are pricing the sudden improvement in Turkey's current account balance, which is good news, I admit it. But again, that is also driven by the fact that there is no domestic demand. Turks don't have money to import things. So either these what called Orientalist approaches to pork barreling would spook the investors, and there will be a run on the lira, or the government will succeed in reflating the economy, that's stimulating the economy, and both inflation and current account deficits roll back, which will scare investors. In my view, it's a catch-22 situation. There is no way to satisfy both what our investors and creditors demand from Turkey and what the voters demand from AKP. At the end, AKP will have to plump down for the voters. That's what every government does. And that's going to infuriate or panic investors, and we're going to have increasing amount of anxiety over Turkish lira. I expect the lira to slip at an increasingly rapid rate as we approach the end of March elections.
Actually, with that last remark, you answered my next question, which would be, do you think these ongoing pressures on the Turkish lira would go away anytime soon, in your opinion? But perhaps, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think we are going to, judging by the futile but increasingly shameless and bold efforts of this government to do anything to find money and to funnel it to the voters, I expect that we will have an episode very similar to what happened in May, the Bloomberg TV interview of Mr. Erdogan, or the Bronson crisis in August. So I have a very specific forecast for the dollar-TL exchange rate before the elections. It will retest the value of 7. So that the TL will be, the dollar will be worth 7 TLs, temporarily, of course, before the elections. I simply see no other outcome, because this government has to win these elections, and it has no money. People are not paying their taxes, companies are going down, and essentially no new money is coming from abroad to Turkey, and every government will have to resort to some kind of populism, and ours is using the old Alaturka methods.
Finally, Mr. Yeşilada, if you were to summarize the main challenges awaited by the Turkish economy in 2019, what would they be?
Well, I think the first is psychological. This completely illogical, rational, and I do it my way approach to economic policy need to change. Ankara needs to embrace the generally accepted good practices in economic policy and devise a comprehensive, well thought out economic austerity and reform program. B, we have a massive shortfall of financial resources. The bad loans will probably have reached $60 billion by the end of elections. That money needs to be found somewhere. Turkey doesn't have domestic savings. So fighting IMF or orchestrating domestic IMF-style austerity program with no wavering or no compromise for the next 2 years are the most important requirements. Most importantly, I think AKP is genuinely popular. Instead of selling this dream of the worst is behind us and the economy will be recovering very quickly, I would go out and tell the people that what Churchill said, blood, sweat, and tears. Look, we have done our best, but conditions have worsened. Heads up, get ready for sacrifices for the next 2 years. It's going to be tough, but stick with us. We'll deliver Turkey to prosperity. And I think the admission by the AKP government that what happened is largely their fault and not some kind of sabotage attack by foreign powers, and that they have the right to demand sacrifices from the public, and they are willing to change their ways, is the only solution for Turkish economy. Otherwise, we're going to, it's going to be like Japan. I mean, year, well, they had deflation, we're going to have stagflation, but very low growth and decades of misery.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yeşilada, for joining us tonight and for your comments.
Good evening now. Bye-bye.
Tonight, we were joined by Atilla Yeşilada, who answered our questions on the recent data announced by the Turkish Statistical Institute and the prospects for the Turkish economy in the new year. And now we'll continue with our next news video. The ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, has finally confirmed speculations that Turkey's former Prime Minister and current parliamentary speaker, Binali Yıldırım, will be its mayoral candidate for Istanbul.
The announcement came as the party unveiled 74 mayoral candidates for the upcoming local government elections scheduled for March 31st. AKP chairman and President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan also announced 39 other mayoral candidates of the AKP for various Istanbul districts. Erdoğan, who last July awarded Yıldırım the State Medal of Honor, praised Yıldırım as being his trustworthy companion for the past 40 years. Our 40-year friendship with Mr. Yıldırım has survived many tests successfully. Mr. Yıldırım has always been ready in a most speedy way in our most difficult times, Erdoğan said. After graduating from Istanbul Technical University's School of Naval Architecture and Maritime Engineering, Yıldırım served as General Director of the Istanbul Ferry Company, İstanbul Deniz Otobüsleri, followed by stints as Turkey's Transport Minister, Presidential Chief Advisor, Prime Minister, and finally, Parliamentary Speaker. Meanwhile, the Ankara Bar Association has called for Binali Yıldırım's resignation as parliamentary speaker over his candidacy to run for mayor of Istanbul, saying that his nomination breaches the constitution as it obligates the speaker of the Turkish parliament to remain impartial. Article 94 of the Turkish constitution stipulates that the parliament speaker cannot partake in the activities of the political party that he is a member of. Mr. Parliamentary Speaker's nomination for Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality evidently violates the constitution, the association said in a written statement on Wednesday. Erdoğan reaffirmed in an earlier statement that the electoral alliance between the AKP and the Nationalist Movement Party, MHP, known as the People's Alliance, will continue with MHP's endorsement of the AKP's metropolitan mayoral candidates in Istanbul and Ankara, as well as many other districts throughout the country. In Istanbul, the ruling AKP did not nominate any candidates in Maltepe, Beşiktaş, and Silivri districts to support the MHP candidates as part of the alliance, according to Erdoğan's statement.
On Saturday, Russia and Turkey agreed to coordinate ground operations in Syria following US President Donald Trump's sudden announcement of military withdrawal.
Speaking after a high-level meeting with Turkish officials in Moscow, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov emphasized that both sides had paid special attention to the new circumstances caused by Washington's pull-out decision in Syria. He also described his discussions with Turkish officials as very useful, saying both Moscow and Ankara had stressed their unconditional respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu also confirmed the two countries would coordinate Syria operations and added that they also discussed plans to help refugees return home. Besides Lavrov and Çavuşoğlu, Russian and Turkish defense ministers Sergei Shoigu and Hulusi Akar also attended the talks. Russian state-run TASS news agency reported on December 29th that a summit of countries involved in the Astana round of the Syrian peace talks is likely to be held in mid-January in the Kazakh capital to discuss the situation. Russia, Iran, and Turkey established the Astana process, a series of talks held since 2017 designed to complement a UN-led peace process.
On New Year's Eve, thousands of Syrian refugees pouring into Istanbul's Taksim Square created a wave of anti-Syrian outrage in social media.
A video showing Syrian refugees' New Year celebrations in Istanbul went viral in the early hours of 2019, with many lashing out on social media at the Syrians and the government's Syrian refugee policy. Young Syrian men waving flags of the Free Syrian Army in Taksim Square, the central point of the New Year celebrations in Turkey, angered many Turks on social media as over 5,000 tweets were posted within hours under the hashtag "I don't want Syrians in my country." In the video, which was shared by thousands in a couple of hours, there are Syrians who are jubilantly celebrating the New Year by dancing in the Taksim Square and waving Syrian flags. But it is noticed that there are no Turks among those joining the celebrations, Sözcü newspaper said. One Syrian man was detained by the police on Monday night for allegedly sexually harassing 2 women. Turkey is home to a reported 3.8 million Syrian refugees, having implemented an open doors policy since the beginning of the conflict in the neighboring country in 2011.
A research assistant at a university in Ankara was killed on Wednesday by a law student after she caught him cheating in an exam.
According to the claims, a final year student at Çankaya University's Faculty of Law, identified only as Ismail H., was caught cheating in an exam by research assistant Ceren Damar last week. The student's exam was cancelled. After the incident, Ismail H. went to the research assistant's room at the faculty. The student first stabbed, then shot Damar twice. 27-year-old Damar succumbed to her wounds despite efforts by paramedics. The student was detained shortly afterwards. The police has determined that the suspect had used a gun belonging to his father, a retired police officer, to shoot the academic. An investigation has been launched into the incident. In a statement, Çankaya University said that lectures throughout the university were suspended for 1 day and the exams were postponed. A ceremony was held for Damar at the Faculty of Law yesterday. The ceremony was attended by Damar's parents and husband, students of the faculty, and fellow academics.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.